On Jeremy Bucci, nominated to the position of Associate Justice of the Superior Court. My name is Mary Hurley. I'm the Governor's Counsel for the region in which Mr. Bucci resides. Before we get started, I would like to introduce my fellow counselors, Attorney Joseph Ferrara. Morning. Attorney Robert Jubinville. Morning. Marilyn Tito Devaney. Christopher Ianello, who is the Dean of our illustrious group, Eileen Duff, and Attorney Terrence Kennedy, who is our historian, as well as Mary Paul's here. Paul. Oh, yeah. Oh, and Paul DiPaolo is here too. I haven't seen him. Thank you. At this time, I'd like the witnesses who are going to testify, Attorney Robert Gray of Greenfield and Benjamin Szymanski of the Franklin Superior Court, and the nominee to raise your right hands. Swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth as it relates to the matter now and hearing before the Governor's Council.
Do.
Thank you. We'll start with Attorney Robert Gray of Greenfield, Massachusetts.
Good morning. I first would just like to commend Governor Baker for the nomination of Jeremy Bucci, the Superior Court bench.
This is on WebEx too, so you have to speak up a little louder, like you're in a big courtroom.
Thank you. I've known Jeremy for some time. I've known him to be an intelligent, compassionate person. I've known him in many capacities in his life. He's always demonstrated an ability to organize, an ability to present himself, and what I feel is very important in the position he's going to be, hopefully assuming a quality of respect for the institution and a quality of respect for the people within it, no matter where they lie within it. I met Jeremy when he was in 7th grade. He began in middle school with my son, and he became close friends with my son and close friends with another person who's here, Michael Iman, who's here. My son would be here, but it's his eldest son's 11th birthday. I know all these things about him, as I said, because I've known him for a long time. I've sort of been with him in his middle school years, in his high school years, in his UMass years, in his Suffolk University years, and spoke with him frequently in his law school years, and spoke with him frequently in his beginning of his legal career in the eastern part of the state, and we were fortunate enough to have him back and join us at the Northwestern District Attorney's Office as Chief Trial Counsel. During all those periods of time, he has demonstrated all the attributes that I've noticed. And there are examples I could give at each one of those levels of time he spent with me, either talking about my giving him a little bit of discussion about his major at the University of Massachusetts and what it was going to do for him. I don't know when he decided that he would become a lawyer, but it was apparent to me that he has the qualities that I would want to have in a lawyer, and that I would want to have in a judge. As I said, he's compassionate, and he has demonstrated those features throughout his life. I have the unique situation where I was a lawyer a year before he was born, and I met him when I was a lawyer. I coached him in basketball. I coached his brother, who was here with him in basketball. I've seen him in stress situations. I've seen him in team leadership situations, and he's always been commendably active and always has had the respect of other people and of his coaches. I know that for a fact. I have seen him in his position as Northwestern Attorney's Office Trial Counselor. I've had cases with him. I have come to know him as a person who can organize a case, who can bring a case to indictment with volumes of information to the point that the discovery that it's provided is incredibly thorough and incredibly well-organized. It shows me that he has the ability to take facts, to obtain facts, and to process facts, and to present facts. I have had times to negotiate with him with regard to clients. He has each and every time understood my position, and in my position, he understood my position as an advocate. He understood my position that I can bring him information about my clients that perhaps are relevant to decisions he may want to make. He's always listened to me. He hasn't always agreed with me, but he's always listened, and he's always been respectful. And we have had a continuous relationship. As that case may have developed, we've continuously discussed it. And so he gets to know my client, and as a person, and understanding, as this council I'm sure knows, the pressures that are on people at this point in our society, be they addictions or be they mental health, are very relevant not only to the defense attorney, but to the district attorney and judges. He's always been able to identify those things. He's always been willing to discuss them, and he's always come up with an alternative to a trial that is reasonable. Whether it goes to trial or not is in the hands of the defendant and the defense attorney, but he's always thought to make a recommendation that is fair and reasonable. And I just commend his ability to analyze situations and to be able to see the individuals out there and to be compassionate as well as fair and faithful to his oath of office as a prosecutor. Those things are extremely important. I suggest being a lawyer and an arbiter of the facts and to being a judge. I also know him and lastly, as I know him as a parent, I know his son Charlie. I know that Jeremy Bucci came from a fine family. I see his family here. I've known his family for a long time. They're good and honorable people and great parents, as is he. He's a good parent. He's an excellent parent to Charlie, and he's giving Charlie the exploration of life that is admirable. I would say in closing that all those things, I cannot give a higher recommendation to this council to approve this nomination. He's a tribute to the legal profession, and he will be, if you approve him, I suggest will be proud of that action.
Thank you. Any questions? Counselor Petito Devaney.
Thank you. I can't ask you a question because you really covered it all. And I don't remember anyone that has the knowledge of a nominee as you do. And and when he was in the 7th grade, was he opinionated?
Well, I will tell you, he was always been willing to discuss things and always had an opinion. I will give you one example of his ability to organize. He and Michael Iman here and my son Jonathan were of the same age. They had a assignment for a health class, and they decided that they were going to do a video, and they did it in my backyard, and they decided they were going to act out a motor vehicle stop for an OUI. They organized it, and they commandeered my vehicle, and they're being 13 years old, didn't work license, so I stood there while they drove my car up, made a stop, and then they went on and conducted this entire thing. It was very well written. It was very well organized. I believe Jeremy showed up with a police shirt and a police hat. I'm wondering where he may have commandeered that, but I found out he got them from his dad. But in any case, the video was a fine success and a tribute to those 3 individuals. I did not stay for the production. I figure another director on the set would be a problem, so I don't know exactly how it went on the production, but it did come out very well, and they did very well in it. They had definite opinions about what they were doing at the time, and it was just a nice picture into their lives at that time.
Well, thank you. Your testimony was very meaningful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're a man of great faith, letting a 13-year-old drive your car, sir.
And there was a big maple tree right there too, by It survives today.
Questionable judgment, but great faith. I don't see any other questions, so at this time, I'll thank you for your testimony. I'll call upon Benjamin Szymanski, First Assistant Clerk for the Franklin County Superior Court.
Thank you, Councilor Hurley, and thank you, councilors. It's a privilege and an honor to speak with you all today on behalf of my friend and colleague, Mr. Jeremy Bucci. As you've heard, my name is Benjamin Szymanski. I'm the First Assistant Clerk Magistrate in the Franklin Superior Court. I've maintained that position for approximately 9 years at this point, coming in at 2013. During that time, I've been able to clerk for Mr. Bucci on almost every trial or every motion or almost every pretrial that he has had in the Franklin County Superior Court. I've read his pleadings. I've witnessed his interactions both in and outside of the court with litigants, witnesses, police officers, co-counsel, opposing counsel. I've been able to, during these interactions, Jeremy's demonstrated himself with a high level of professionalism. He's held himself out with great integrity and showed respect to everyone to which he has come in contact. In fact, the Clerk of Courts, Susan Emon, wished to be here today in support of Mr. Bucci, but was unable to as she had some tragedy with family in Florida and asked me to speak on that. Jeremy's love of the law is unquestionable. He's gained his reputation as a highly effective and well-prepared. Jeremy and I have discussed regular ways to best create efficiencies within our criminal docket, which has always been kind of fun to deal with the prosecutor who I'm usually griping at in order to keep things moving forward. One of the often things that Jeremy has is sitting in the courtroom. You can find him often sitting, reading through case law, reading the day's published opinions, or oftentimes rereading opinions to make sure the argument he's about to present is sound. He finds a little corner off behind our jury box, and it's always kind of fun to see it because you'll oftentimes see his co-counsel coming and mentor, he'll mentor and explain his argument. So you're finding this teaching level. He has taken great pride in his motion practice, and he has submitted pleadings that are always thoughtful and well drafted. He takes on complex areas of law with earnest. He is an excellent writer and orator. Jeremy has represented the Commonwealth with the highest degree of ethics. He listens and communicates clearly. He exhibits empathy, compassion, not only for victims, but also for the defendants. He seeks to ensure that fairness and justice prevail in each case he prosecutes. He can often be seen meeting with opposing counsel, negotiating cases in the hallways, thinking outside the normal to find dispositions that are best served with that defendant, the community, the victim in mind. Mr. Bucci has worked with our probation department, the Franklin County Superior Court Probation Department, regularly, to the Sheriff's Department and law enforcement to better come up with different dispositions, as I've mentioned, that take on treatment for addiction or other ailments that have been brought to Mr. Bucci by opposing counsel, so that the crime does not increment, that we reduce recidivism. Jeremy does not waver when faced with difficult decisions, though. It's not to say that Mr. Bucci is always looking for the way out. Mr. Bucci has taken into consideration those false circumstances. I've seen him stand, taking on the hard position. Working with Mr. Bucci in my role as a clerk, I've had the privilege of working alongside him, in addition to working with Mr. Bucci in my role as a clerk. I've had the privilege of working alongside him on boards of the Franklin County Bar Association and the Franklin County Community Fund. On both boards, Jeremy has taken great pride in spreading the importance of the judiciary into the community. He has worked with the community fund to provide scholarships to local college-bound students. He has crafted, that have answered essay questions. He has worked to bring lawyers and the judiciary into the community through establishing a 5K run. And in fact, establishing a golf tournament this past year. I'd be amiss if I did not state, as a Franklin County resident, I am honored and thankful for Governor Baker and for nominating Jeremy as the Associate Justice of the Superior Court. And I am honored to stand before the Governor's Council as they consider, as you all consider, the nomination. It confirmed Jeremy will take a historic position, being one of the few Franklin County Superior Court judge nominations. I am confident that he will do you all proud, and I'm confident he will do Franklin County proud. In closing, I thank you all for your time and ask that you confirm Jeremy Bucci as an Associate Justice of the Superior Court.
Thank you very much. Questions? Counselor Devaney?
I'd like to ask you, you know me very well. Your name is Colette. Tell me, what do you think is his outstanding attribute that he brings to the way?
Mr. Bucci has an ability to truly listen. I know that Mr. Brett has mentioned that, but it's very true. I've sat and, honest, I sat trying to come up with my speech on how do I capture Jeremy in just a very few minutes. And what you see with Mr. Bucci every time he comes into the courtroom is he immediately finds the attorneys he's dealing with. He communicates with them. He doesn't make a statement, turn his back, walk away. He talks. He tries to find information. They come to resolution. He's able to find middle ground. And I think that that is a huge attribution as he is considered for the bench. Oftentimes we see our judges come in and having to see both sides. Mr. Bucci has demonstrated the ability to do that in one side.
Well, I agree. I met with him for quite a long time, and meeting with me, he's a good listener. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor.
Other questions? Thank you, sir, for your testimony. At this time, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Judge Brager, the Chief Justice of the Superior Court, who's with us today, and also Judge Ditkoff of the Appeals Court, who's with us today. At this time,
She did acknowledge me.
I did.
I'm sorry, I missed it, Counselor.
No problem. I didn't know if there was somebody else that I had missed. So, having heard the witness's testimony, at this time, Attorney Bucci, I'll turn the floor over to you for your formal statement. And before you do that, would you like to introduce the people that are here with you today?
Yes, Counselor, thank you. People that are here today are my wife Karina, special thanks again to Benjamin Szymanski and Attorney Robert Hurley, Michael Emond, Ken and Sally Burnham, who are Karina's father and stepmother. My father, Terry, is here. My brother, Todd, is here as well.
All right, thank you very much. At this time, I'm inviting you to make your opening statement.
Thank you.
And also bear in mind, we're on WebEx, so you have to speak up nice and loud like you're in one of those courtrooms up in Franklin County that you need to shout almost.
Yes. First, I'd like to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for the time that they have taken to consider my nomination, for meeting with me, and for the faith and that they've placed in me in making this nomination. I'd like to also take time to thank Attorney Lauren Green-Petrino, Attorney Emily Gauthier, Chief Counsel Robert Ross, the entire JNC and JBC for the time that they invested in me to determine whether I was qualified for this and to conduct the interviews that they conducted. Councilor Hurley, I'd like to thank you for the time that you've taken, the kindness that you've shown me as this process is unfolded, to the entire Governor's Council for the time that you've taken Counselor Devani, thank you for the time that you made for me in person to meet with me. I appreciate that. I'd also like to especially thank Attorney Robert Bray, Attorney and First Assistant Clerk Magistrate Benjamin Szymanski, my wife and my friend Michael Iman, and my brother Todd for all traveling over 100 miles to be here today, each direction. That means a great deal to me. I thank my friends and my extended family who have encouraged me to apply in this process. I'd like to thank my son for the unconditional love he has shown me. I'd like to thank my wife, Karina, for her love and encouragement, counsel throughout this process. I couldn't have gotten here without you. I'd like to thank my father and my late mother for a lifetime of love. Counselors, I was born and raised in Franklin County, Massachusetts. Throughout my childhood and as a young adult, I had the good fortune and the positive influence and guidance from my parents. They instilled in me a certain set of skills and principles that I think still guide me to this day. My father worked in a paper mill in town for 44 years. He is the son of 2 Italian immigrants that each came here at a young age. His father was from the Naples area and his mother was from Sicily. My mother was born and raised in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and she met my father while working at a paper mill shortly after the death of her mother. My mother stayed at home with my brother and me through elementary school and returned to work when we went to middle and high school. As I sit here today, it's impossible to list every lesson and value that both my mother and father modeled for me. But there are some lessons that they taught me, both explicitly and by example, that I feel compelled to mention because I credit their work as parents for being much of the reason that I humbly come before this council. They taught me that there's no substitute for hard work, perseverance, kindness, and instilled in me a sense of duty. By way of example, my father built the house that we grew up in. I have memories of helping, or rather watching, my father build each addition as he and my mother saved enough money to afford it. The sacrifices that they made were born of their sense of duty to family. Those who know my father refer to him as Mr. Fix-It. If you need it, he can build it, and if you break it, he can fix it. He's the embodiment of self-reliance, perseverance, and hard work. My mother had a frankness that was an endearing characteristic. At times, I've recognized glimpses of that frankness in myself as I speak in court. Each time a court has thanked me for my candor, they are thanking me for reflecting my mother. My father has a constant, calm, and attentive kindness. Over the last 2 decades, during many conversations that I've had with those with whom I've worked, whether it be colleagues, investigators, opposing counsel, I've often thought of my father and used his example to emulate that attentiveness. I attended the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and graduated with a degree in political science and philosophy in 1998. While studying there, I made the decision to attend law school with the purpose of becoming a prosecutor. I dreamed that one day my reputation would be such that I would earn the trust necessary to be considered for a seat on the bench. I made the decision after reading a description in a book called Helter Skelter, written by Vince Bugliosi. The book was his account of the prosecution of Charles Manson. The passage begins with the well-known canon of ethics in the American Bar Association. The primary duty of a lawyer engaged in public prosecution is not to convict, but to see that justice is done. What followed was a brief description of his effort to live up to that canon, and it sparked my interest to follow the career path that I have pursued. He said, "If in a given case a conviction is justice, so be it. But if it is not, I want no part of it. I've never felt the defense attorney has a monopoly on the concern for innocence, fairness, and justice. In a great many cases I handled, I sought and obtained convictions because I believed the evidence warranted them. In a great many others in which I felt the evidence was insufficient, I stood up in court and asked for a dismissal of the charges or requested a reduction in either the charges or the sentence. The latter cases rarely make headlines. Only infrequently does the public learn of them, but far more important, however, is the realization that fairness and justice has prevailed." I would later frame those words and place them on my desk as a reminder of my duty and purpose as a prosecutor. I went on to study and graduate from Suffolk Law School in 2001. I was hired by the District Attorney Ralph Martin to begin work in that fall, during that fall in the appeals unit. I told him that I wanted to learn how to win a case before I went to do trial work. Following District Attorney Martin's departure, District Attorney Connolly was appointed and later won election. I would go on to serve under District Attorney Connolly for the remainder of my time in Boston. Over the years, I trained and learned new skills as I moved through the various units. In 2002, I transitioned from the appeals work to trial work and motions work in the district court. In December of 2003, I began juvenile prosecutions at the Boston Juvenile Court. There I learned both the juvenile justice system and grand jury work on more serious juvenile prosecutions. In July of 2005, I began to handle Superior Court caseload exclusively, and I have consistently practiced in the Superior Court since July 2005. I was appointed Chief of the Narcotics and Asset Forfeiture Unit in 2008, and in that job, I was required to learn various requirements of civil and rem actions. Also in 2008, my mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of ALS. She would pass in the next year. A little over a year after that, in 2010, newly elected District Attorney David Sullivan offered me a job that I accepted and I have held until this nomination. In addition to allowing me to proudly serve the community where I was raised, it offered me the ability to be closer to my father and extended family. To begin a family of my own, in addition to that, and for that I am forever grateful. Indeed, raising my son Charlie has been the greatest joy of my life. Throughout my career as a prosecutor, I have purpose to listen to the opposing counsel to better understand their clients' histories and motives. Well, I've tried and secured convictions in a large number of cases, including murders, shootings, stabbings, robberies, home invasions, and the highest level drug trafficking offenses during my career. There have been more cases where I have worked or the litigation didn't make headlines at all. Much like the passage I read from Bugliosi's book, I have closed investigations where I believe there was insufficient evidence to proceed. I have dismissed cases and reduced charges where I believe the evidence was insufficient to sustain the Commonwealth's burden of proof. I have recommended sentences below the guidelines and probationary sentences where I thought that was appropriate. And where I believe the defendant was treated unfairly in the trial court, I've conceded the issue on appeal. Much as I've had a sense of duty in my role as a prosecutor, I'd like to assure you that if you give me the opportunity to serve as a judge, I will have fidelity to the rule of law. My duty to follow the United States Constitution, the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, the laws that have been passed, and the cases that have interpreted those constitutional principles and laws would guide my every decision. And I think it bears saying that my belief is that any ruling by any judge that compromises their decision with bias or favor for either party erodes public confidence in the rule of law, and it thereby undermines our democracy. I want no part of that. If you give me the opportunity, I think one of the metrics that I would like to see used to gauge my success as a judge in a year or two would be whether or not litigants in criminal cases choose my courtroom to pursue Rule 12 lobby conferences. The bench trial is exceedingly rare in Superior Court, but if to the extent that a bench trial was appropriate, I would hope that it would be my courtroom that they would come to. My hope is to be known as a judge that demonstrates compassion and uses empathy to fashion appropriate sentences during those Rule 12 lobby conferences that are all together in Superior Court. Again, I thank the council for the time that they've given me. I'm prepared to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. I am standing in for Councilor Hurley for a few minutes, and I get to go first because I'm to her right. You and I had a long chat the other day. Appreciate your time. You have an outstanding resume. You have the support of counselors in the chambers here, Counselor Kennedy, Jubenville, and Counselor Hurley, of course, have all dealt with you and have high regard for you. I particularly am fond of your helping the police. I spent 30 years on the job, 9 as chief of police. I also taught at the academies and things of that nature. And I'm really impressed with that cops are getting good educations on how to do their job properly. So the amount of work you've done in the DA's office is incredible, from the chief of narcotics to senior trial unit, juvenile prosecution, safe neighborhood prosecutor, the appeals court unit, the South Boston District Court. You've done it all. And you have my support next week, so I'm not gonna consider this. You're gonna be a great judge. Counselor Jubenville.
Thank you. I've known you, had cases with you in Suffolk and in Northampton. And in fact, that case that we had in Suffolk, you recall, was transferred up to the federal court, Syracuse. Still going on today. Some of those defendants still going on. In any event, I've seen you in a courtroom. I've dealt with you. We've had many discussions about you becoming a judge, and I'm finally glad you put your application in. I'm finally glad you're here today so I can vote for you next week.
Thank you, Councilor.
My pleasure.
Counselor Devaney.
See you again. Thank you for all the time that you afforded me. That was a long distance you had to come, so I appreciate that. First of all, I want to say that I got a call from Judge Didcock, and said a lot of nice things about you and support. And also Dan Conway. And Dan and I served on the Commission of Social Justice, so we go way back. So he said a lot of good things about you too. And that was your boss. First of all, I just want to say that come before me to have publications, and you have quite a bit. And before I go into that, I want to ask you, you've had a lot of serious cases, criminal cases. Is there one that will always stand on your mind? It's really unforgettable to you, and it was so egregious.
Yes, there are many very, very egregious cases that I've handled. But there was one case where I got to do something sort of outside the lines, and I really, I'll always remember that the fact that I was a lawyer in that position at that moment helped people that had gone through some real horrible stuff. There was a murder. I'll only recite the facts that are relevant to what later happened after the trial, but there was a double murder in Orange, Massachusetts, several years ago. 95-year-old Thomas Hardy was stabbed to death in a chair. His wife, who was 76 years old and wheelchair bound, was also stabbed and beaten and left for dead by 2 defendants. They were tried and convicted of first-degree murder, and several years after or a few years after the conviction, the 67-year-old son of Thomas Hardy reached out to me and called and asked whether he could have his father's hiking boots returned. His father, Thomas Hardy, was wearing hiking boots, and he was an avid hiker. He had hiked with the Hardy Party, they called it, with as many as 85 hikers. And one report said that Thomas Hardy had hiked the Grand Canyon 41 times. So he was wearing these boots when he was murdered, and he was killed where he sat. So there was no biological evidence that made it down the boots. They were not admitted at trial, but they had been seized by the police and held by the police. And there's a law that says you've got to retain that unless there's a court order to release it. So with the request, I called the appellate attorneys at the time, and I said, could you consult with your clients and ask if they would be willing to assent to the return of these boots if they are not going to play a role in any hypothetical motion for a new trial or any of a new trial. They went and consulted with their clients, and they got back to me, and attorneys gave me the right to file the motion and to send it to them, or to draft the motion, send it to them, and they would give their assent. And after some drafts went back and forth, they did that. They marked their assent, and we put it before the trial judge, and we were able to get those boots released. I remember handing them off to Don Hardy, his son, and just earlier this year, he sent me an article from Maine, where he lives, on a write-up about the boots and where they had been, and the pictures that they had taken for the family, and that felt like a special moment. I won't forget that.
Said a lot of meaning. You have a lot of cases with drugs, I mean, where it just keeps going on and on. Now it's opioids, most of it, isn't it? And the thing is about reading the JNC's application, I don't always know the rest of the story, you know, and so I'm left with, gee, what was the sentence? There was one of the cases that you had, and it was a woman who worked in a doctor's office, and she wrote prescriptions for herself and everybody drugs. And so she contributed to her daughter's addiction to opioids. How did that resolve? Because it ends there, and I don't know what kind of a punishment was given.
There was a very lengthy plea. It took about 4 hours to read all the indictments. There were several hundred indictments. And the recommendation, or the sentence that was handed down was probation for both the mother and the daughter with a number of conditions. Yes, it was the kind of case that was driven by addiction. And there was no overt harm done to anybody in the community. The drugs that were prescribed were self-prescribed or prescribed for the daughter to consume it. There was no indication of sales. And probation seemed like the right disposition. And for them, it was a harsh penalty. They lost their jobs and everything else.
Well, your publications were very impressive to me, and I'd like you to talk about, could name a couple, I'm timed, so I don't have too much time. One of them was silencing the voice of the people. That's me, I'm timed.
That article was made moot a couple of years later. There was something that used to be called a Brandano motion. It was a motion to dismiss in what was called the interest of justice. It was what I argued in the piece with Jack Zanini was that dismissing a case in the interest of justice steps squarely on the executive powers. And that is not what a court should be doing. Within a year and a half, I think it was, I think it's Commonwealth versus Tim T was handed down, and Brandano motions stopped.
You know, we think about that so often, eyewitness identification, you know, how reliable is it? And you wrote about it. So tell us about that publication.
That's another issue where I wrote that article, and I was concerned about the disparity really between courthouse to courthouse, whether or not experts were going to be allowed to testify to something that one judge was saying was common knowledge, and the next judge was saying that's not common knowledge. I'm grateful that this has been sorted out in the way it's been sorted out by the SJC. There have been there are now instructions that address this head on in jury instructions. And where there's a cross-racial identification, those experts are still admitted and very valuable for a jury. But more to the point, those jury instructions that have been handed down by the SJC have really hit this head on and addressed the things that I was sort of concerned with back at that time.
And so you did apply before.
I did.
And it's the same group, same people that you went before. And did you get to the JNC?
I did get an interview the last time. It was for a district court spot, probably 5 years ago. They were not this, I mean, it might be the same regular.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yes.
Different group than what I met with.
Sorry, it was the same. Well, let me say this. There's 21 of them. So 21 should be at every hearing, but they're not, because this chair doesn't do it that way, and he splits it up, so that might be true, that you didn't have the same ones. So, but anyway, so, you did go before them, or not?
I did get an interview the last time.
Yes, and then would you get a letter, or how's that work?
I'm trying to recall. I think there was a letter. Yeah.
So anyway, so how was it different this time? Was it, did you feel that you had more qualifications and, it wasn't that long ago?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years was a lot that happened, I think. And I focused a little more of my application on my writing, which is why I'm very happy that the nomination is for Superior Court, because I know that I'll do,
You have to speak up, Jeremy.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
I know I'll do more writing at Superior Court, and that's my strength, I think, rather than the number of decisions that a district court judge needs to make on the fly. I think my strengths are better suited for looking at a case and taking time and research and writing and reading the pleadings. Those are where my strengths lie.
But I always say I would never vote for anyone who didn't have compassion, and you had it, you have it on your sleeve, really. So I'm very pleased that you got through this time and that you were appointed. It was my pleasure to meet with you.
Thank you.
It's a funny thing because we talked about the cha and the names, because in Italian, two C's and a cha, and my mother was a Danucci, and so I said, hey, we're chas.
Yes.
Because no one pronounces it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
All set? Thank you. Just for your information and the information of anybody who's watching, who may be interested in becoming a judge, 40 or 41 is too young. It's very, very seldom that anybody that young gets an interview. So they're looking for somebody 45 or more. So, Counselor Iannella, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. You're a big supporter of this gentleman. You called me on his behalf. I respect your judgment. Because of that, when your name comes before the council, I'll be more than happy to support you. I was impressed with your presentation as well as your witnesses. Thank you very much.
Counselor Duff?
Thank you. Really enjoyed my talks with you. I think we really got, I'm not gonna rehash everything we talked about, but we really got into some deep nitty-gritty stuff. I think you understand what I care about, and I clearly understand what you care about and your motivation. I'm not gonna belabor this with a lot of questions because I already have a good feeling and know the answers to them. But I do want to say that one of the things about you that I thought was impressive and different is that we do see a lot of people come before us who are prosecutors or with background as prosecutors. And we're concerned about that, to be really honest. We're concerned about that balance. But one of the things you spoke to me about was what the job of a prosecutor really is. And that is to find the truth and not just to prosecute, not just put someone in jail or get, to trial, or we don't always go to trial anymore. We have settlements and things, which frankly is normal. But you're one of the few people that I've ever heard really acknowledge that that's part of it. And that's 50% of it, really, at least. And that gave me, frankly, some personal relief and almost a sigh. Because it's hard when I see somebody who I think is qualified and would be a really good judge, but I'm like, do we need another one? And it's not personal, but seriously, do we need another prosecutor? We get a lot. And we have to think about that balance. And without being prodded or asked, you presented that balance to me. And I appreciate it. I didn't mention it to you at the time, but I thought it was very unusual. And I do think you're a little on the young side. I've also told you that. My biggest concern about that is for your spiritual and mental health, and your support system that you have, because it's a long time to 70. And, by the time people who work full time, by the time we get to 70, we're ready. We're ready to retire. I mean, we just are. It's hard, and the work you're gonna be doing is going to be hard, despite what some people think. So that's my concern with you. But I have no further questions. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Counselor Kennedy?
I disagree with my colleague. I'm gonna be 65 in February. It's not that long a time, the 70, when you're looking at it.
That's not what I said.
But, well, that's how I interpret it. I have no issue with you. We've had cases together. You've always been very fair-minded. You've always, treated people with respect, whether it was a judge, another lawyer, a defendant, the victims, everybody. Yeah, I think you're a home run, and I'll vote for you next week.
Thank you. Counselor DiPaolo?
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for reaching out to me and didn't connect, but I did have several conversations about you, and I have more folks to call back about you. You've had a distinguished career for the Commonwealth. I do want to just ask about your exercise of discretion. I always go there in the application. You write about highly individualized assessment of the offender. You talked in your statement about some of the goals you have around recidivism in the system and crafting things individually. I'm wondering, so I'll just pick out one. How does considering whether the offender shows contrition or not factor in to your potential thinking as a judge?
So I've often said this in conversations with families of victims or in various cases where there's been somebody that's aggrieved that I'm talking to, a witness or a victim. The only way in our criminal justice system they're ever going to hear somebody say, I did this, and validate, affirm their experience is in a plea. So there is something very valuable about somebody coming before court, demonstrating that they are willing to publicly state in front of the people that they have harmed that they are responsible for that. I also think it's an important step in the offender's mental reform. In order to reform what they've done, there has to be an acknowledgement that they've done something wrong. And so I think that's offenders that are willing to do that before trial offer something to both the judge and the victim to consider and how to fashion a sentence that addresses where they are at. Because they're further along than a person that never concedes even after they've been found guilty.
So I appreciate that thoughtfulness. I guess two reactions I'd make is one, I absolutely agree that for the aggrieved party or the victim or the victim's loved ones, that's a very important step to find some level of affirmation or closure for their grief. I do wonder, though, whether that's a factor in sentencing, whether that's something that is part of the sentencing process, how well healed the victim's emotional state is, or how firm their.
I think that I think if I.
You see what I'm getting at, though? Like,
Yes.
that's important in the big picture, but how does it impact sentencing?
I think the sentencing portion of a plea or contrition in front of the court demonstrates that the person is capable of reform and that they want to reform. There's a desire to do better. And I think that needs to be accounted for in a sentence when you're thinking about who's standing before you. And you're asked to use compassion and demonstrate empathy. Part of being empathetic is understanding where that person is. And I think a person that concedes their guilt is further along in the process of where they need to go.
I mean, is there any evidence, is data gathered at all about how contrite someone presents and how well they reform or how reduced their recidivism rate is?
I'm sure there are studies on that. I am not aware.
I'd honestly be curious, because this is an issue that I wonder about how, whether, and usually in the parole board settings, this is a little different, is where my mind is on that, but how much contrition or should be a factor in a dispassionate application of the law. Data is valuable. And so the last thing I'd ask you about in Superior Court is The thing that is important, but the years are going by and the data's not fresh anymore. But we have sentencing disparities according to race in the Superior Court. Why? It's not because, well, I won't speculate what it's because, but there's a lot of factors that go into that. What's your reaction to that? Are you familiar with those statistics? What do you think it's all about?
I am familiar with the Harvard study, which I think is one of the studies that pointed that out.
Yeah, and specifically, as you know, they found that Superior Court is where the discrepancies are, and District Court it's fairly.
I am aware of that. I think, as you pointed out, there are a number of factors. And I wouldn't speculate in any particular case as to what factors are contributing to that, but I do think it's important for particularly judges to be mindful of studies that are handed down like that. And I can tell you in my office that I'm at now, we've made a conscious effort to try to address unconscious or implicit bias. I've attended 2 different trainings in that regard.
Did you find that valuable? Because I'm very interested in addressing these issues, but I'm also, having gone through implicit bias trainings in multiple workplaces, I'm slightly dubious around whether they are effective in creating any level of like cultural, I don't know, change or an ongoing assessment of things rather than a kind of acknowledgement that as our brains take in so much information, we develop biases which we apply to situations. Like, do you find it do you think it's valuable? You think it's going to actually address? Do you think we'll see disparities change because of those trainings? Because they're happening all over the justice system, and I'm not criticizing them because I think they're very well intentioned. I wonder though if there's any lasting benefit to them.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
And there are a number of factors that go into those disparities, as you pointed out. That's one of the factors, and I think we should take on the factors that that's one of them.
Sorry, what's what?
Implicit bias is, and going to trainings and raising awareness and trying to.
How do you think it plays in philosophically? So if it's like drugs and weapon charges, is it really bias that's making a Black defendant get a longer sentence? Like if other contextual factors are similar, I mean, is it bias that's doing that? Like where do you think the bias is?
I can't really comment on that. I don't. It would have to be a particular case, and you'd have to evaluate the defendant's history and what the particular crime had for a potential sentence or minimum mandatory that may take discretion away. I don't. There's too many factors to answer that.
Sounds good.
Okay. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. As I said, a lot of people are in your corner, and you've had a very distinguished career on behalf of the people of the Commonwealth. So I appreciate that. So thank you for your time.
Right. I have 100 questions. Are you ready? Where are you taking your folks for lunch?
I was thinking of walking to the north end.
Right. Well, I'll see you the next time. I have no questions. I got more great calls on you than is normal, which tells me that you are extraordinary. The other thing is both Counselor Jubenville and Counselor Kennedy agree that you were a great prosecutor. Fair, reasonable, everything a prosecutor should be. So with that said, congratulations, your vote will be next week, and I declare this hearing concluded.